I'm excited to have you back, as you know. I guess, so just to set up the conversation, last time when we discussed, we were kind of discussing human history, like you just mentioned before we started this. You were saying how one thing you mentioned was that human nature doesn't, necessarily change. It just kind of like echoes throughout history. One thing that I really took away from our last conversation was your emphasis on the importance of diplomacy. And this week I've been really paying attention to the news. I go in and out of being addicted to American politics. Sometimes it's good for me, sometimes not so much. You could argue that it's never good for me, but I've been really focusing on what's been going on over there, the different relationships, say, between Australia and China, America and China. There's crazy things going on all over around the world. And I've been thinking about what you said, how in times like these, diplomacy is one of the most important things that can take place. So why don't you just set it up for us? What is diplomacy and why is it so important?
Well, diplomacy, which is about the relations between states and between sub-state actors. It could be diplomacy between a transnational corporation and the country that they're in. It could be some kind of NGO like Amnesty International and how it interacts. It's about how different people, countries, units, whatever it is, interact with each other to achieve a common goal. Now, what I like about diplomacy is that not unlike some other ancient professions, and I'm talking here about history, not the other kind, has been around for a very long time. Diplomacy as a practice dates back to the Bronze Age, from the Euphrates Kingdom right through Akhenaten in the 4th century BC, up through the Egyptians and the other Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans. Diplomacy is very important, and I'm moved by a couple of lines. And one is, no wall of power has ever stopped a war without diplomacy, and no war has ever stopped without diplomacy. The diplomat, or the fancy word for it is diplomatist, is a crucial person. Now, I've met a lot of ambassadors, men and women who've given their lives, who are career ambassadors, and they all have that same sense of gravitas, and they have that same sense that they failed. they always think because wars took place, or their advice was ignored, or nations just simply respond to the mob in the street, that their careers are not as satisfying. But I disagree with each of them. I think being a diplomat, and I mean by being a diplomat, I mean having a calling. Today people love to throw around that expression, I got a passion to make food, and I got a passion to help people, and I got a passion to do this and that. What Max Weber's people would have said is you have, in the 19th century, you have a calling. There's an inner voice inside of you that says, you must do what you have to do, whether you are Christopher Columbus or Cortez after that, or you're Thomas Edison. There is an inner voice. And I think all the great diplomats I've met, and I've met those who negotiated limited test ban treaty. I met a guy who was in charge of Lend-Lease, a very famous guy, Governor Harriman, who worked for both John Kennedy and Franklin Roosevelt many years before that. These people have a sort of a greatness about what they've done. They have real diplomats, whether they're men or women I've met. They have sort of a texture to their lives that nobody else has. You can make all the damn money in the world. You can retire at the age of 30. You can be Elon Musk and go to Mars. But at the end of it, you don't want to do anything he says, aside from, get on a ship maybe or something like that. These people are very wise, and most of them don't write memoirs, though they do write. They do engage in oral histories, which are contained in a different place, located in different places, like the Library of Congress. But they're very mum about what they can say after their careers are over, because the only time people are ever going to talk to you is if they know they're not going to read about this later on, particularly in countries that where life is precarious, whether it's Rwanda or North Korea. You're not going to be working for Joseph Stalin and write your memoirs because you never have a chance to read them. So these people have all done terribly interesting work, and I think the diplomacy, the diplomatic experience of each nation on Earth, and there are 195 today, maybe 140, 130 that work pretty well. And I think it reveals the soul of a nation. I mean, the reason people are so damn depressed with Donald Trump is that he is threatening, he is retreating from the world. And people have seen American presence, American values, American security involved in their lives for so long, even trade negotiations since 1945. They can't imagine what the American retreat's going to look like and whether anybody else is going to fill it up. I mean, the reason that Donald Trump is so depressing to people who have an internationalist outlook is just that he has a very nationalist outlook. Now, he's not brand new. Donald Trump's diplomacy is not new. It resonates a lot with Warren Harding in the 1920s. It turned his back on the League of Nations and the work of Woodrow Wilson. It harkens back to the time of George Washington, who in his famous address said America should avoid entangling alliances. But he didn't say America should avoid the world. He said it should avoid entangling alliances. And after America broke its security treaty with the French in the 1800s, did not have a single peacetime security treaty until NATO in 1949. Just think about that, 149 years later. So when people say, Trump's going in a new direction, actually he's going back in an old direction. And the question Americans have been asking for the last 100 years since the First World Wars, can they stay at home? That's the question. Can anybody stay at home? And I think, this is where I like you, I suppose, I've always been interested in what antiquity has to say, what we can learn from people who were there, who saw things that we can only imagine. And I think of Macaulay's famous poem about Horatius at the bridge. Now, whether it's a legend or not, or whether it actually happened or not, he is attributed with this great saying that says that when your neighbor's house is on fire, you're in trouble. And I've always thought that war and peace are indivisible. And the only way to understand war and peace is to understand it from the view of a diplomatic historian, because it subsumes economics, politics, it subsumes international relations and everything else. I mean, to be a diplomatic historian means that you have license to roam all over written history, which has been around for about 3,000 years. And you got the same, whether you walk into a village in the hills of New Guinea, or you walk into the court of Louis XVI, or you walk into a French court, or a British court, or something like that, you got the same problems. Same way of analyzing things. You got a number of players, then you got a number of issues, and then you got a number of strategies, and then you have a number of outcomes, which as soon as the outcome is arranged, it becomes the next issue. This is how you can understand the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. This is how you can understand the Peace Treaty of Versailles in 1919, because they all have the same characteristics. Now, what we have to do as civilized, educated people is to flesh them out. And these people have got some wonderful lessons. There were people in 1918, 1919 at Versailles who said this isn't going to work. In fact, it's planting the seeds for the next war. And they were dead right. The trouble is they're a minority opinion. So as we go back in diplomatic history, we look at the diplomacy of things, we see that there are minority views which then become majority views later on. So it's this constant tension between the minority view and a majority view, which sort of drives history. It's sort of like the poor man's version of dialectical materialism, where we have to keep coming up with these different syntheses of ideas. Anyway, I knew I was stuck on diplomatic history the first time I read William Shire's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I was 14 years old, and I thought, what did these Germans do to these people and to themselves and to the rest of the world? I mean, it made me very interested how people whose language is a beautiful language, who've contributed to music and other things, how they could have done this to themselves and to other people. And so you get right into their diplomacy. And when you get into someone's diplomacy, you're really trying to sense their worldview. What did Germans see in 1918 and in 1939? Who's running the show? What are the issues at stake? And so you see these different diplomatic experiences I think it's a very rich thing. I've written about 40 books, and about 25 of them have the word diplomatic in it. The American Diplomatic Revolution, I wrote in 1976. And then Histories on U.S. Foreign Policy. I had some popular textbooks. My little book with Oxford is in several languages, including Arabic and Vietnamese. So I wish the Vietnamese might have paid me some royalties for it. I think they did their own version. That's okay. God bless them. They can have it all. Anyway, you see that there is a renewed interest among younger people and people who are interested in the world to look at the role of diplomacy. Now, I've never much written about the history of diplomacy, that is the etiquette of the court or the Havana Convention of 1928, which sets out the terms of how you deal with people when you're overseas representing your government, or the treaties of 1969, which are confirmed in other conventions. I'm just interested in the diplomacy of ancient nations, modern nations, whatever. I'm interested in diplomacy in action. And that's where all my books are. That's why I'm a diplomatic historian and not a historian of diplomacy. That's all very important, because whether I'm looking at the Night Stalin and Churchill divided Europe in December 1944, which tells an awful lot about what's going on in the world and about the diplomatic practice currently represented, I can kind of narrow in very quickly, focus in very quickly on the conversations between Stalin and Churchill, which are a revelation. Behind closed doors, these guys speak the same language. The trouble is that while Churchill's trying to keep the British Empire together, Stalin doesn't care, and he doesn't care what's written on a piece of paper. So at the end of the day, diplomacy depends on the willingness of the other side to bring forward what you've agreed on. Because I always thought the great moments in history, the Peace of Westphalia or Versailles or the Congress of Vienna or the famous meeting between the Athenian admiral and the fellow in Milos, is that when they talk about what happened on that day or what was resolved on the day, they're taking really a Polaroid shot. You got a picture of what's going on and where everybody stands. And as soon as that picture's changing, and here I'm going back to my high school physics about the Heisenberg principle of how things change in front of your eyes. I mean, you're on to the next issue. So every issue that's resolved becomes every issue that has an outcome becomes the issue again later on. As soon as it's done, it becomes a new thing. Today, it's about what did Richard Nixon and others, what did they really mean about coming to terms with China on Taiwan? Is it really an all-Chinese affair? What did we agree to? We got Chinese assistance with the Soviets versus letting the Chinese have a free hand in Taiwan. So people today say, would America go to war for Taiwan? I don't know, and I'm not betting any money on this one. But it all depends on how people view those agreements. Now, in Oxford's kind of like Bible of treaties, I wrote a couple essays there on what a treaty is, whatever you call it, a convention or a solemn treaty. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. As long as two groups of people agree on something, that's sort of a treaty. And it's binding. It's binding between those two nations. And it's got nothing to do with larger bodies of like the United Nations and all the rest of it, or the League of Nations before that, or even the Council of Congress of Vienna in 1814 or 1815. It's got to do with what two nations or what two people think they're doing. And so the first thing I look at when I look at diplomacy, I want to know if the two people in the room really represent the people they say they're representing, or they're just representing themselves. So, the diplomat has to follow instructions, and then he or she sends them back. But the interesting thing is when heads of states, is when Woodrow Wilson's in the room at Versailles with Clemenceau, or Stalin's in the at Tehran and Yalta with Franklin Roosevelt, or Churchill is in the same room as Stalin, or when Adolf Hitler is in the same room with Neville Chamberlain. When you have the leader of the country in that room, you have summit diplomacy or personal diplomacy. And what's interesting about today is, as more and more nations become disillusioned with European Union diplomacy or globalization, whatever it is, what they're really getting disillusioned by, the big powers, is by multilateral agreements, multilateralism. And so I predict that in the next 10 years, we're going to get more of summit diplomacy or personal diplomacy at the top. Now, the interesting thing about Donald Trump, whether people like him or not, and in many ways, he's completely unlikable. In other ways, I can see why a lot of Americans are attracted to somebody who wants to just get through all the red tape. Barack Obama couldn't sit down with Putin. And the last time I saw him standing next to President Xi, there was a great deal of bad body language going on. And American presidents before Trump couldn't sit down with Chairman Kim from North Korea. I mean, the thing that I like about Trump, he's got all the world leaders, all of whom would go to war with him tomorrow over certain issues. He's got them all on speed dial. So he's kind of brought summit diplomacy back to the center. And the Chinese think they know all about Trump. They regard him, his comments as unfettered. They want to know what he has to say behind closed doors and what his representatives have to say. But the fact that we have an American president who's so out of favor with his own allies, whether it's NATO or other people, he's told to pay their bills. The fact is that he's got the world's protagonists on speed dial. I mean, this strikes me as this is new territory. I mean, he can get these guys. He might not be able to stop war. I mean, when the Seventh Fleet was headed for North Korea, Admiral Harry Harris had his orders from the Pentagon that if the North Koreans engage him, the order was to fire back, and there would have been war with North Korea, and millions of people would have died. And people say, "Oh, we can't have millions of people dying." Well, one of the things about COVID-19 diplomacy, as we start to get into the blaming game, is that millions of people might still die. I mean, this idea that we are immune from large loss of life is sort of a mental trick. I mean, we're not immune to a large loss of life. It's looking at it straight in the face. So people talk about Trump's arguments with the Chinese now about who's to blame. So it's called COVID diplomacy. It poisons everything else, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, to get back to the original story, I think diplomacy cuts right into these other cultures, tells us a great deal about them. And of course, the more you know about other people, the more you know about yourself. I mean, that's the beauty of, that's what Socrates is telling us, the life of the mind. He's not saying the life of the mind is a lot of fun. He's saying that without it, there is no life. Because if you can't understand what's going outside your door, it can't inform your life, and it makes you no better than the animal kingdom. As I like to say, the Army manual used to say, animals learn from their own mistakes. We learn from the mistakes of others. But sometimes these mistakes keep repeating themselves.